move on to our next session on the watershed approach and understanding and applying the watershed approach right in the FEED programs. We have two great presentations today. First, Nick Miller, the Science Director from the Nation Conservancy Wisconsin, is going to talk about the watershed approach pilot that ELI-TNC did in Wisconsin and how that's being applied to the FEED program there. And then we're going to hear from Lori Summer, the wetland mitigation coordinator from the New Hampshire Aquatic Resource Mitigation Fund. She's going to talk about the watershed restoration strategies in New Hampshire and how they guide their decision making there. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Nick. And let us know if you can hear us any better now. We have the microphone up a little bit. Is that better? Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Rebecca. So, as Rebecca said, I'm going to talk about how we're integrating a watershed approach through a collaborative effort with DNR into we being DNR and TNC. I'm going to use we pretty expansively throughout this discussion because this is really truly a collaborative effort. Right now, DNR and TNC are working closely on bringing a watershed approach, advanced planning, proactive planning, into site-based decision-making for the ILF program and for other programs too. But as Rebecca mentioned, this is based off of a pilot project that we worked on with Environmental Law Institute, so we're working very closely together early on. And then we've engaged with the Army Corps of Engineers, with EPA, actually, the phase we're in right now is funded by our Region 5 Wetland Program Development Grant. But having said that, there's not enough logos in here. This is a truly collaborative effort. There's folks in the room in St. Mary's, Douglas County, others with whom we've been working and partnering on all of this. But our goal is we're really working together to respond to what we saw as a call in the 2008 rule to develop a watershed approach for prioritizing potential compensatory mitigation sites for protection and restoration of the sites. And that's based on their potential to sustainably provide ecosystem services at a watershed scale. So we're in the middle of taking the pilot project that Rebecca mentioned and rolling it out for all 8-digit or moderate-sized watersheds across the state. So it'll be in every service area for the ILF program. And really, I think the way to sum it up is it's in essence the spatial realization of a compensation planning framework. So Palmer mentioned in some of his opening comments that if I can paraphrase, maybe I'll get it wrong, but this the ILF or in-lieu FEED programs really provide an excellent opportunity to move from sort of a reactive site-by-site decision-making basis for siting mitigation to one that integrates advanced planning and where we can carefully consider how we choose sites at a watershed scale, which are potentially the best sites. So what we're doing in Wisconsin is taking the compensation planning framework for our ILF program and spatially realizing it, so linking it to specific sites on the ground. So I'm going to give you some context, some details, and also some thoughts about where we're headed. And then I'd love to give you some more information about how the specifics of linking a decision support tool like we're developing into an ILF program. I actually was going to tag team this presentation with Matt Patrice, who until recently was Wisconsin's ILF coordinator. But I'll do my best to sort of speak to those points. So zooming out away from Wisconsin for nationwide context, starting in about 2009, there were a number of agencies, organizations, entities that started to develop pilot projects for a watershed approach, experimenting with how the concepts and language within the 2008 rule could be put into play in the watershed. And some of you may be looking at this map and thinking, that doesn't have the right array of states. This is an old map, and there are far more states that have stepped up to the plate and started, as we're hearing, started to experiment with this. So while I'll be focusing on the one in Wisconsin, it's important to note that many different lessons have been learned around the country. And the Nature Conservancy and Environmental Law Institute, again, partnered, not just at that pilot, individual watershed pilot level, but at the nationwide level, to take lessons learned from these pilot projects and incorporate them into a national watershed approach handbook. So this provides case studies. It was put out in 2014. It provides case studies and recommendations from really a wealth of planning experiences out there. And it draws not just from Section 4 related planning, but also Section 319, also, just a variety of other sources. I think there were about 65 total count sort of approaches and methodologies that we looked at. And this handbook has also been informed by, vetted with, funded by a variety of agencies and organizations, including the Corps and EPA, academia, NGOs. So I'm going to try to summarize it in one brief slide. So really, first we found from looking across all of those examples that there's really a suite of elements to a watershed approach that are really a key components. One is assessing what are the watershed's needs. What are we attempting to do in a watershed? You need to know that before you can determine what outcomes you're trying to seek for that watershed. And then that will in turn guide which sites you look at and how you assess those sites and how you end up eventually prioritizing them. And what we found is that all the approaches that we looked at can really be placed along a continuum. And looks like I have no shades on here. Color, I have very, very subtle color gradations on all of these slides, which are completely lost. That's okay. So they fall along a spectrum based on the mix of the elements that they contain. Wow, we're losing a lot. You guys can't see the X's here, can you? Okay. Okay, well, the point is kind of lost. But basically, sorry about that. Basically, where you can't see a green mark, or where you see one of these slashes, there's a red X. So it's just trying to convey which elements are integrated across, depending on where you fall on the spectrum. So there's, at the left end of the spectrum, there's sort of decision frameworks, which start with the potential mitigation site and build a watershed rationale around that site, so a justification and rationale. Then in the middle, we have watershed analyses, which rank sites based on the potential to meet watershed needs, but don't necessarily prescribe the outcomes. And then at the right end of the spectrum, the watershed plans. That's really falling into the terrain where you're prioritizing specific stream reaches or establishing specific water quality goals to come out that would come out of this. And there really are pros and cons to being anywhere across that spectrum for any approach that you would take. I mean, you can imagine some of them just briefly is that at the left end, it's easier, it's more cost effective, it's faster to do that on a site-by-site basis. But because they consider sites on a site-by-site basis, there's not necessarily assurance that you're selecting the best opportunities in the watershed. And then at the right end, the plan hits on all of the important elements. There are no red X's in that column. It hits on all the important elements, but it could be viewed as somewhat fixed because it locks you into specific goals or specific locations within a watershed. So what we found, I think it's safe to say, is that there's sort of a bell-shaped curve for where these planning frameworks fall along the spectrum. Most of them are in the watershed analysis or decision support sort of area. So zooming back into Wisconsin, we are falling into the middle of that decision support tool. And we decided to take an ecosystem service approach or framework to prioritizing sites. That's recognizing that services are distributed differentially across a watershed, while according to wetland type, land use context of the wetland, watershed position, and a variety of other factors. And then impacts are also distributed differentially across the watershed. So, because of that combination of factors, ecosystem service needs are unique to each watershed. And so there's a need, or each watershed has its own different needs. So watershed needs becomes of paramount importance. So more on the pilot project that Rebecca mentioned that we worked on in PLI. For the Wisconsin pilot, we call it the Duck Watershed Approach. It's in northeastern Wisconsin, stretching from for any convenience to the city of Green Bay up to further up the west shore of the Bay of Green Bay. And we zeroed in on some of the same elements that were identified in that watershed approach handbook. And I'm going to give an overview of each one of those steps and show some of the mapped outcomes. But I'm also at the same time going to discuss how we're adapting and improving on the pilot project that we developed as we spread this out across all watersheds across the state. So first off, identifying sites. Before prioritizing sites, we have to define what a site is. And specifically, we were looking for existing wetlands for protection, destroyed wetlands for reestablishment. And then we were also able to, based on the analysis that we are running, we're able to get at some rehabilitation potential also. So all relevant within the ILF context. So to identify sites, we compared the current distribution of wetlands, which in Wisconsin is not NWI, but Wisconsin Wetland Inventory, with our historic distribution of wetlands, which we defined as hydric soils in the soil cover. So hash marks are the historic distribution, green is current distribution, and so where you don't have overlap, there's water loss. And potentially restorable sites are, of course, also defined by land use. So if it's currently developed or in natural cover, those were current sites. During the statewide rollout, here's an improvement thanks to some great analyses done by the state. They have, the Department of Natural Resources has developed a statewide potentially restorable wetland data layer, which is based on that whole process I mentioned before, but also integrates flow accumulation modeling, which, long story short, enables us to look inside of non-hydric soil polygons and identify where those wetland inclusions. And it really enables us in the state to get at quite a few more sites than we were with the previous methodology. In addition, it also helps us to identify subsurface flow and therefore connectivity of a sort that we would not have been able to identify, which is functionally important between existing wetlands. So that yielded, in fact, the pilot, watershed approach pilot, it yielded in that 8-digit HUC, which is about 315,000 acres, about 12,000 acres of potentially restorable wetland. It's in the darker color, it used to be red. And then about 52,000 acres of invisible wetlands on that map. So for those on the phone, you can probably see the colors. I just realized here in person, we have some color representation issues. So that's a lot of sites to prioritize, and so we needed to carefully prioritize among them. And this is sort of an overview of how we went about that. Watershed, these are the functions down the middle that we were interested in for prioritizing wetlands. So watershed needs, as I was mentioning earlier, were determined by translating historical wetland losses in terms of acreage into losses of wetland services. And we did that based on a methodology that's morphed quite a bit. It was originally developed by Ralph Tyner, NWI Plus, in Fish and Wildlife Service. So on the left side, on the left map here, shows some watersheds with, I hope that wasn't my time. Okay. Darker shades indicate sub-watersheds that have lost proportionately more services over time. And then, and therefore, we interpret that as greater need for reestablishment of those services. So, so we can consider service loss at that watershed scale and figure out generally where we need to go, what services need to be restored. And then on the right side, oh my gosh, the colors are way off. On the right side, we have a map that should indicate darker colors showing where services stack up. So we have a list of 7 services for the pilot, and where those 7 services start to stack up at individual sites. And be they potential protection sites, existing wetlands, or potentially restorable sites. So that 7 services we looked at, we're now looking at 10 services. With our statewide rollout, we recognize that we really need to break water quality into several functions: phosphorus reduction, nitrogen transformation, and then also sediment reduction. And then we also add holistic quality. So the map on the right is a composite map. It shows an aggregation of lots of different services that we looked at. And just to give a little window into how we went about assessing those, just a pictorial view of the analysis. I'm going to give you an example of flood abatement. So we asked a set of 3 types of questions. First of all, for each wetland. So say we have an idealized wetland in the basin there in the middle. We ask, what is the opportunity that that wetland has to abate flooding problems? And so that would be informed. So we asked questions of the data we had at hand and that we were able to aggregate, such as are there developed impermeable surfaces upstream? Are there steep slopes that would contribute water during an event in a flashing way? So that wetland becomes more important for abating floods. Then we ask, what's the inherent effectiveness of that wetland? So wetlands that have, for example, that are located in a depression are better able to abate floods and temporarily store floodwaters than those on a slope. And those that have persistent emergent vegetation can physically slow water as it moves through. And then we also ask a third set of questions, which is, what is the social significance? So wetlands that are positioned above and connected to flood-prone developed areas or areas of economic importance or social importance would again be ranked higher. And then we ask, and those are just examples. Some of them are based on more black box modeling, but some of them are more intuitive, like the ones examples I just gave. But we asked that for each of the functions that we were assessing. We did wildlife a little bit differently. We're using now a guild-based approach. So we're asking how important is each wetland for forest interior birds, for amphibians, and for water birds. And we're basically saying, okay, for a given wetland, what's important for that particular guild, and then modeling out the potential for that guild to persist in that site, at that site based on the availability of those characteristics. And those characteristics include things like connectivity at the landscape and proximal scale, landscape condition, proximity to other habitat types that it may need to fulfill its life history cycle, and then also habitat size and availability in the vicinity. So we generated lots of maps in that pilot area, and to help prioritize wetlands at the watershed scale. And there are many routes through those data to select a site, whether you're working individually or in partnership with other groups. And by the way, I pulled this from another presentation, and what I should preface this with is we really recognize that our planning that comes out of, that's catalyzed by Section 404, by mitigation, is incredibly important to the activities of many other entities, organizations, initiatives, funding sources in achieving their goals. So if you take this ecosystem service-based approach, the results of this become important in aggregating the all of the collective goals of many different entities. So we went with that, we ran with that, and we developed a decision support tool that basically says, look, if you're, say, a city planner up here in the county, and you have flooding problems, you can use this tool to say, okay, wait a minute, I could work further up. I know that there's a great deal of flood abatement loss further up in the Pensacola River drainage. And then if I restore wetlands there, then I'm going to be solving some of my, hopefully solving some of my flooding problems down further downstream in the city. And then you can bounce back to the individual site map and figure out which exact sites you could choose to work at, or which may be available to work at. At the same time, an agency who might be interested in wildlife habitat restoration and protection may choose to work in the same watershed in order to aggregate and therefore expand upon the benefits that the city is working in. And that in turn will benefit other services that are important in that watershed. So the premise is, by aggregating resources, we can begin to really leverage a lot greater outcomes at the watershed scale. And then perhaps all ecosystem services, thinking where we can get the most ecosystem services, the most bang for our buck, essentially, across the watershed, maybe a filter for agencies that have less specific missions, or maybe it would be important for mitigation. So we developed a tool, which I'm not going to get into. I'm not going to show you this tool because we're improving on it. We're now, as within a year, we'll have developed, this is just a draft of where we're going with the decision support tool. We're putting focus groups together so that we can make sure that it meets users' needs. Our primary user, of course, is the ILF program in Wisconsin. But the goal is to route them through. There's so much data that we're presenting, so we want to route them through those data. So users will be presented with a screen to help identify what are the watershed needs, and then being able then to select which sub-watershed to work in. Once they get down to the sub-watershed scale, we're developing an app within this tool to allow users to tailor this to their individual missions and goals. So on a function-by-function basis, they can say, well, I care about sediments, reducing sediments and improving water quality. The other ones not so much, so they'll have slider bars where they can weight those individual functions. And then that will allow specific sites that are important to that particular user to pop up, and then collateral information will be provided. So, So this, of course, is all, I think I know what I was going to say. This is a really important caveat, is this is all GIS-based. This is based on remote sensing, GIS analysis, et cetera. And so we recognize that there's a need to field validate, to make sure that what we were seeing with our models matches what we're attempting to do on the ground. And so, so we have gone out into, across Wisconsin, but we've really focused our efforts in the Milwaukee River Basin to apply an independent field-based functional assessment methodology, the Wisconsin Rapid Assessment Methodology, to see do the same sites pop up as being important for various functions as we're seeing in our GIS models. So we're ground truthing results, whereas at the same time using that information to improve our models and make them better. And this also gives us inroad to working with stakeholders in that area. So next steps, we are completing our analyses. We're basically spending all our time, DNR, TNC team, GIS analysts and ecologists working on this. But it can't be just DNR and TNC, and so we soon will be looking for peer feedback and review of the products. And so I would hope that anybody here who's interested in taking a look at this and providing input, it would be incredibly welcome. As I mentioned, we're also forming these focus groups to make sure that the end product, the outcomes, the decision support tool, really is functional and useful for our end users. And then I put as a next step here, because it's not part of this project, but hopefully will be part of the next project. Our team has discussed, this fact that the GIS analysis takes us so far, but then you get into the site and there's a whole slew of feasibility factors. Is the land available? Is the landowner interested? Can you get equipment on the site? There's a whole slew of things that are important. And so we would like to take the next step, and also are our GIS models correct? And so, and as a next step, we aim to take the top tier of sites that we're identifying as part of our GIS approach, and then go out and field validate them, and basically kind of almost pre-certify them, and take them the next step towards figuring out, towards implementation. This is ILF integration. This is where I wish I could say more, but my co-conspirator could make it to this meeting. I really wish he could have trees. But so ILF integration, Palmer spoke to it. We do have advanced planning with all ILF programs because of the requirement to complete a compensation planning framework. Our compensation planning framework in Wisconsin was specifically tailored to anticipate the arrival of this advanced watershed planning, this GIS tool. So basically it gives a list of criteria for selecting sites, but then says, but the priorities of the watershed plans that come out of this planning effort will sort of trump the existing language in the compensation planning. And then also, we're at an early stage in Wisconsin, and the first round of RFPs has gone out, and there's been some proposals made in the first few service areas. But the ranking criteria that Matt Matrice developed also assigns scores to those sites that rank high within this watershed approach, or within any existing watershed plan. That factors into the ranking. So I'm going to harp on this again because I just think that I come from a non-governmental conservation organization, and I see huge potential here for, again, in wetland mitigation, there's a need to have this advanced planning. There's a mechanism to put it in place. And we should all feel great about the fact that it's incredibly relevant to leveraging conservation far beyond just Section 404 mitigation. So a few examples, and then I'll wrap up here. Avoidance. We actually found that DNR came to us and said, we developed this plan in the Duck-Pensake watershed, and an ATC power corridor is going through with several alternatives. And they used the information that we developed in order to figure out how could they avoid impacting wetland services as much as possible. So they looked through the data that we produced. Then there's also natural resource damage assessment targeting. We have an NRDA program in the Lower Fox, and with a fair amount of funds that come through the pipeline now and then, and it's been used. Our plans have been used to target expenditure of those funds. I think there's high potential with nutrient trading. I don't know the degree to which this is potential in other states, but we have phosphorus trading programs that are coming online in the state of Wisconsin, and I'd love to see natural infrastructure be a part of that, and we have ready-made, we will have ready-made decision support tools to help target those funds if natural infrastructure isn't part of it. Like wetlands. We're also tailoring our approach specifically to delisting Great Lakes area of concern, again in the Lower Fox, where that's another project that's in the works. And then we actually were pleased to find that our Duck-Pensake watershed was used to identify sites within the 9 key element plan. And that's a recent development. And I think I'll just wrap it up. Oh, and then proactive conservation land trusts are using these tools, and we're continuing to communicate with land trusts so that we can build beyond this sort of reactive approach to building back the natural infrastructure and ecosystem services of a watershed, and working to proactively restore the health of these watersheds. That's it.
Any questions for Nicole and Lori?
Just real quick, have you used this yet with the IRT, like your proposed projects, or is that in the future? That's a lot of information.
It is a lot of information, and no, it hasn't gone through that stage yet because of where the Wisconsin ILF program, the stage that the Wisconsin ILF program is in. So there are no project ILF programs that have gone before the IRT.
But are you going to try to use it like as a justification maybe for a project, or is this more of an internal ENC to prioritize? For
No, that's where I wish I had met Patrice.
I was just going to say about your partners.
So DNR, that's what I was trying to get at before, and maybe didn't say quite well enough, is that it's actually referenced in the ILF instrument and says that the compensation for each watershed, each service area has, the requirements for how you would cite a project. This actually, the instrument actually says, if a watershed plan exists, such as the ones that we're developing, then priority will be given to those sites that are ranked high within that watershed plan. Now that the rubber hits the road within the RFPs that that state has already begun to start putting out, in that those sites that are in alignment with those plans score higher during the proposal review process.
Within TNC or within?
No, not within TNC, within the ILF program.
Because that's what's in your instrument.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
I was wondering if you've had any issues with private properties being identified on an application.
On decision support tool like this?
Yeah, where you're able to sort of see where a wetland might fall on an individual's property, and any ways you guys have dealt with that, or it's still be on the web.
Yeah. That's always every type of information you serve out on the land across a landscape scale like that. That's always a consideration. We've had that information up for the Duck Saki for a while. We've had sort of a rudimentary decision support tool that's online right now, and has been for years now, and never heard any kickback from any issues with it. So that's interesting though. If that's a concern, we should talk.
One last question? Okay, we'll turn it over to Lori. Thank you again, Nick. Thank you. We are in the enviable position of being between you guys and lunch, so I'm going to try to stick to my notes so we can get to some questions and on to lunch. So today I'd like to provide a brief overview of the New Hampshire ILF mitigation program and how we have handled the watershed approach for wetlands, and then I'll touch on a new initiative that we're working on for stream mitigation. Sort of a little bit of an overview. The Department of Environmental Services, which I staff and have been on staff for over 25 years, is a regulatory agency that issues permits for work in wetlands and surface waters. We've had a strong regulatory program for many years. The regulations have been on the books since 1969, so we have a really good program that emphasizes avoidance minimization. And in 2004, we were able to adopt a chapter of rules that focuses on mitigation. And in those rules, we set up a framework for mitigation to be provided by upland preservation, restoration projects, as well as wetland creation. And those rules get into how much is required and how our focus of our program has been that we want to see compensation, or we want to mitigate compensation for the lost functions and values of projects that pay into the fund,
So we really focus on that, keep track of the impact amounts and lost amounts, but really wanting to drive home the point that we really look at the functions and values that are lost. So quickly after those rules were developed, we started working on an ILF option as a fourth option, and we're able to get a statutory revision in 2006, which authorized the Department of Environmental Services, DES, to be the sponsor. So we were set up to be able to accept payments, mitigation funds. The statute contains the fee structures, how payments are calculated. It identifies what projects are eligible to pay into the fund. It also develops a strong site selection committee. So as DES is the sponsor, we felt it would be important to have a larger group of folks at the table to help guide site selection. So we composed a site selection committee made up of 8 organizations, 4 state organizations. So DES is one of the members, as well as our New Hampshire Fish and Game Department, the Office of Energy and Planning, as well as our Heritage Bureau that looks at land protection and natural community issues. And we have 4 other NGOs that are on our committee. The Nature Conservancy is one. We have another large land conservation organization, which is the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forests. They're on the committee, as well as our wetland scientists, our state wetland scientists organization, and an association of conservation commissions. So they really help bring projects to the table, as well as help steer the science for site selection. One nuance of our program is that we have really strong local conservation commissions. So we allow for those folks to look for and identify local projects that may be linked to a development project. So instead of projects going straight to the ILF option, and a developer has to look for local mitigation options first. So it's a little different from what the Federal Army Corps has established, but it works in New Hampshire. So we have had a long history with working with the Corps and our federal partners, and we started operating the New Hampshire ILF program in 2006, and as we heard from Stephen Palmer, the federal mitigation rule came out in 2008, so we were required to come into compliance with that rule, and since developed our ILF program instrument. So everything that Palmer talked about in terms of what needed to go into the instrument is in our instrument, and it brought our existing program up to the standards of the federal mitigation program regulations. So the instrument has one of the components is the compensatory, the compensation planning framework, which looks at historic losses, current conditions, and threats. So in developing our watershed approach, we looked at what our site selection committee sort of guidance was and adopted a watershed divided the state into 9 watershed areas based on the Nature Conservancy's ecosystem habitat regions for our state. So we developed then data analysis on historic condition. We looked at current conditions of wetlands in each of the 9 service areas, looked at how much loss had occurred over the years through development and agriculture, and then finally, through the analysis, determined what the current state of wetland and aquatic resources were in each of the service areas. And what we found is that we're doing pretty good with the strong regulatory approach, as well as seeing land being conserved through mitigation. So we really, at that point, decided to work on focusing our watershed approach to target the important high-quality aquatic resources on the landscape through land conservation efforts. Really tried to develop goals in coordination with EPA and the Corps to look for and identify these high-quality habitats, and then look for, within the context of those land conservation parcels, whether there was any restoration opportunities available. Restoration or enhancement of wetlands within the context of that land protection piece. And then we also, with the site selection committee, really work on the coordination among the organizations to maintain good, strong policies and programs, and work with what information they have that can help steer and improve our program. So working with these partners has resulted in tools that assist in the identification of good mitigation projects. We have a one-stop tool in the department that's basically our online searchable database of environmental data. So applicants can go and query that information to determine where environmental data, what environmental questions they might have, and they can find the information there. Around the same time that we were developing the mitigation rules, the Fish and Game Department was required to develop a wildlife action plan. I think most states have a wildlife action plan. We looked to that information for identifying high-quality habitats for protection. And also, it is a good resource for showing where areas can be restored on the landscape. We also have a tool, it's New Hampshire Granite, and it's a geospatial data that you can query, so you can piece together data like from the Wildlife Action Plan with conservation lands and make connections in the landscape of where land should be protected or restored. And the New Hampshire Wetland Mapper is the tool for folks to gain information on functions and values of wetlands. So the biggest reason I think the success for our Aquatic Resource Mitigation Fund program is the connection that we have made with the Wildlife Action Plan. This is an example of a town map that's online, and the different shading, that high kind of pink purple in here is the highest quality habitat in the state. So the yellowish, I guess, that you would, I think the shading is tough, like Nick said. Usually it's the purple, green, and yellow. Green areas are the highest value habitat in the region, and the tan are the supporting landscapes. So with that information, these are filters composed of GIS data that indicates what degree a particular patch of habitat has good biological diversity. So the filters that go into the model includes biological, landscape, and human impact factors. So the analysis can produce these maps to show where good high-quality wildlife habitat exists, and those then are targeted for protection. What have we seen funded over the years? I'll go through a couple examples quickly. So for every grant round, we advertise funds that are available for wetland and stream restoration. This project was a project in a highly developed urban setting in Dover, New Hampshire, where a lot of the wetlands and streams have been culverted, buried. So through funding the University of New Hampshire and the city of Dover, we were able to daylight, a good like 0.9 miles of a first order stream. Through this area, we were able to develop, restore some wetlands as well as some improvements to stormwater management. And this area flows down to a high quality perennial river, the Cotica River. So on that end, we were able to protect some acreage for public use. And this project really engaged a lot of landowners to invest and see the significance of stream and wetland resources. Another project was in the southern part of the state here, the city of Nashua, and in this project we were able to protect over 200 acres of land. You can see the red highlight on the purple block. That's the Tier 1 habitat that this parcel was focusing on protecting. So we were able to protect the high habitat value. The Pennachuck Brook is a water supply source to the city of Nashua. So we were protecting all the headwaters to that city's drinking water. It was a mile of frontage on Pennachuck Brook with this specific yellow flower, which is a state endangered smooth beggar stick plant. So this was really a high important location on the landscape. There was also resources identified for source water protection as well as wellhead protection areas. And on top of the land conservation effort, we were able to enhance 3.2 acres of wetland resources through manipulating ditches in some dammed areas. So we were able to eliminate those within the parcel, enhance those wetland functions, and see the long-term conservation of this parcel. And another one along a similar vein, this was a headwaters parcel to the city of Durham, which is also the University of New Hampshire. So this area, this project conserved 176 acres of land, a mile along the Oyster River, which is a significant stream reach in our state. So this was the headwaters to the drinking water supply of Durham, and have provided connections in the landscape to a lot of other conservation lands. So providing that greenway for wildlife and improved wildlife connectivity in the landscape. They are now working with NRCS on this property to work on New England cottontail habitat restoration measures, which is a species that is endangered in our state. This is just to sort of give you an example of how our funding is important to these projects, but it's usually not the only component of funding. There's a lot of projects require multiple funding sources to make it over the finish line. So this was a good example of how they pull together multiple funding sources to make this project effective. So success today, this will be our 7th grant round. We've had 6 grant rounds. So every year we advertise what funding is available in the 9 service areas. We receive pre-proposals, and our site selection committee then gets back to the applicant with information on how to improve their project or if it's not eligible. And then we announce awards at the end of the year. So we've had great success. Out of the 6 grant rounds, we funded 63 projects with approximately 12,300 acres of land protected. We've seen 18 acres of wetland restoration through these projects, wetland enhancement, and over a mile of stream restoration in small, sites. But those projects amounted to over 49 miles of stream improvement, stream connectivity improvement. This year, we've advertised 2.5 million across all 9 service areas, so each of the 9 areas have funds available. Our pre-proposals came back in, and we received 40 pre-proposals, which is a lot. It's a good problem to have, but that's a lot of projects to be looking at. Full applications for the program are due in August, so we'll see how many of those then we will take to full review, site visits, and then evaluation with the site selection committee. So I'd like to turn now our attention to how we're developing sort of the stream resource components of the ARM fund. And to understand where we are now, we have to understand a little history. And in 2005, New Hampshire experienced an extreme flood event that resulted in this culvert blowout. So this was a culvert with about 30 feet of impounded water behind it. And it was a tragic loss of 7 lives from this one culvert blowout. Again, it was a tremendous eye-opener for our state and our infrastructure needs. And as a result, the legislature developed a flood management study committee that issued a recommendation for the state to establish a stream crossing assessment program. So we were tasked to identify problematic stream crossings in the state. They pretty much put to task my agency as well as the Department of Transportation and Fish and Game to come up with a collaborative partnership to conduct assessments of all stream crossings in the state. So their key finding was, the goal was to ensure that bridges and culverts are adequately sized. So a huge task, putting the burden on the state agencies as well as getting help with nature conservancies, sort of the science behind some of the aquatic organism passage information we have, and get to work. So I won't go through the slide completely, but it's to illustrate the point that this one issue, the stream crossing issue, really then had to become a priority for these 4 agencies: DES, Department of Transportation, Fish and Game, and Division of Homeland Security and Management. So it put us all together with the one goal to identify the most at-risk vulnerable crossings in the state and to prioritize funds to replace those culverts. So in order to tackle a large-scale assessment project, we got to work with the partners and developed a culvert assessment form. So this is information that is gathered at each of these stream crossings and gathers the environmental condition data, which DES has been managing in a database since 2009. One thing that we really stressed during the data collection is that we want to make sure that there's high quality control. So this information is really very accurate. So we take photographs, we have teams trained completely on the assessment form, and then meet and discuss any issues that are coming up with the form and make fine-tune that. Around the same time that the data collection was getting underway, the Department of Transportation funded the University of New Hampshire to come up with a statewide asset data exchange system. So SAIDS was born, and it's a central database for DOT to put their information in, which might be guardrails, sidewalks, all those assets. It's basically an cloud-based data collection with all the GIS information that goes in on their assets. When they developed that, they didn't realize that, how big that would become. And the stream crossing database morphed into morphed into having a spot on SAIDS, so this stream assessment data could be collected and put into the SAIDS database. So basically, we have the opportunity to use iPads to go out in the field, the culvert assessors, input the information on the iPads, that goes up to the cloud, gets stored, and then we can bring that information down to review, do QA/QC on, and then basically be out on the platform for agencies and the public to review. So in 2014, so 2 years ago, we did pilot to coordinate this data collection, and it's become a great opportunity for all this stream assessment information to be centralized. So again, we collect the information, it's stored in the cloud, then it's brought down to the desktop, and we can run different analysis on it. And we share this information with agencies as well as regional planning commissions and local conservation commissions. So with this opportunity, there's been a explosion of data. So we, as a group, decided we need to develop a stream crossing steering team. So we pulled the groups together, really in an effort to ensure that each agency was responsible for the specific condition data that they were tasked to assess, get out, and collect information, and then manage it. As a result, we are experiencing a lot more data coming into the system, being collected and assessed. Right now, we have about 3,800 to 4,000 crossings that have been assessed. There are probably about 16,000 crossings that will need to be assessed, but we have now this mechanism to collaborate and pull our resources together to collect information. And with the number of assessments that we're collecting, we've been able to begin to conduct preliminary analysis on the data. If folks are familiar with Vermont's stream guidelines, they have come up with an assessment model that once information is put into the system, you can determine the geomorphic compatibility of a crossing, as well as determining how well the existing crossing is functioning for aquatic organism passage. So with this information and analysis, we can produce a single condition assessment map that identifies potential at-risk stream crossings that then can be used by state agencies, municipalities, the private sector for prioritizing culvert replacements. So DOT can use this information to prioritize where their funds go to replace culverts, as well as local communities, and it helps our program to identify which ones are the worst offenders and put monies beyond funds towards these culvert crossings to improve the geomorphic compatibility as well as the aquatic organism passage. But we're also really focused on how many stream miles of free-flowing, how resources are we creating. So it's been a great initiative, great program to see come together. We'll have more crossings and assessments to go. But with that in mind, communities that do get their culverts into the system and assessed, they can then look at, based on fully incompatible or compatible, where are the ones that are the worst that they should put their monies toward replacing. And you can look at the geomorphic as well as the aquatic organism passage, and then make some determinations. So they are a little different, but in the end, it's then an opportunity to target these, failed systems, failed crossings, and improve wildlife habitat connectivity. Finally, the stream, this whole effort with the 4 agencies have been collaborating with the technical advisory committee to then go out to communities to help them assess which crossings would be the highest priority to replace. So not only does the geomorphic compatibility as well as the aquatic organism passage features come into that equation, they might be looking at bus routes, which is the crossing that they would mean the most to our community in terms of bus routes, evacuation routes, emergency response rates. So that information now is coming in to help steer where these replacements are best to be funded. And so to sort of round out the whole stream passage improvement program, what we're trying to do is when say, for instance, the Department of Transportation has a project that is going to be paying into the fund for stream impacts, we would prefer those funds to go to a stream crossing that is identified as a priority to replace. So instead of the funds coming into the ARM fund, we would like them to go and replace the local stream project, so we can get both, can get that improvement done as well. So all of this stream information also is going to help site selection committee of the ARM fund program to prioritize where the stream funds go for replacement. I've probably gone over a little bit, sorry, but we do have a lot of information on our website that you could query, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Questions?
So I have a couple of questions. So the state rule that was initiated in 2004, has that been updated to the ARM program?
So yes, so this
So
is
it's integrated into the state rule.
right. So we had to adopt the fund, ARM fund. We had to go to statutory and have that built into the law. So basically, it recognizes us as the sponsor. It sets the fee structure. So if we do want to go back and change any of that, we have to go back to the legislature to gain authority to change that.
Yeah, another question I have, and maybe I misinterpreted it, but it seemed like you had a lot of federal grant funding that went into, I don't know, it looked like it was implementing mitigation sites through ARM, some of them. How do you separate that out, since you can't use those federal funds to generate credits to fulfill through the ARM?
Right. So there's no federal funds. I'm not sure which here. So the funds that come into the program are all from development projects. Any project that exceeds 10,000 square feet of impact is required to provide mitigation. So then their option is to provide a payment. And so those serve as state and federal mitigation.
No, I get that. Maybe I misinterpreted that slide. Was it development of the program?
So
where all those funds were put?
Yeah, so we have received GBPA wetland program development grants over time to keep the program sort of, to look at ways to improve it.
but those funds don't go to fund sites.
I think what might have been confusing,
Yeah.
you showed a slide that showed multiple sources of money to implement a project. One of those
Right.
sources
Oh, I
was
see.
ARM funds, but the
Okay.
other sources were other sorts of funding.
Sure, so one of those would be the Natural Resource Conservation Service, that's a federal source of funds, but mostly they're local foundation grants. They are NRCS. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service sometimes offers grants.
And those other sources,
Private funding, fundraising, we've had some crazy fun. Yeah, so these are expensive projects, but often our component of the payment is sort of the catalyst to get these other funds together.
and these other sources of funds, forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, are not generating mitigation credits.
Right, exactly. Right. Sorry about that.
Other questions? Thank you. I think the caterer might be running a few minutes late, so we have a few more minutes in this session. So is there anyone want to talk about challenges with the watershed approach or other questions you have of people in the room? Dana?
I'm just wondering how, because when you take a payment in, you need to show the replacement of that type of impact, whether it's same type of wetland or same functions and values are being replaced, and trying to marry that with the watershed approach. I'm trying to remember in the federal rule, if there's leeway for sort of ecologically significant, more significant projects that would sort of lead you to replace out of kind, in other words. But I wonder if anyone has any thoughts or
Well, the
ideas.
focus is on fulfilling or attempting to address environmental needs in the watershed. And so from that perspective, with a structured, well thought out framework, it might be determined acceptable for out-of-kind compensation if it were to better address those environmental needs.
And I guess tied to that, I'm wondering whether when people sell their advanced credits, are folks trying to select a specific type or just generally selling credits no matter what the impact is?
It's very wide. You have some where the credit types are these big broad buckets of wetland or stream. You have others. Bob Holland's ILF program has broken them out into vernal pool and other aquatic resources. Gail, in Seattle, you're looking at a number of distinct functional groupings.
Buckets of, water quality and hydrology habitat credits. Our problem is not all the impacts are using the same tool. So the conversion of currency from one tool to a ratio, when they're using, that's our big ticket item that we're trying to figure out. How do you do that conversion if the advanced credits are all based on this credit debit tool for freshwater wetlands? You have a marine impact. And we don't really have advanced credits, so we're looking at amending our instruments to address that shortfall.
Michael, a few words about NCPMS and credit types. You all distinguish in terms of stream compensation a number of different resource conditions, right?
Right now, stream credits are based on linear feet, and we have 3 types of wetlands.
But you also consider, do you not, temperature regime?
But yeah, we have temperature regime and physiographic regime. The peak regime.
So it can be sliced and diced or aggregated, and it seems like every ILF program is taking a slightly different perspective, hopefully appropriate to the ecological regions that they're operating
Other questions or challenges folks are coming up with when they're applying the watershed approach or trying to apply the watershed approach?
Well, I can give you some comments.
Please. Michael.
We pretty much used the approach in the first presentation, identifying specific sites, prioritizing them, and ranking them, giving them more points in the RFPs and all that stuff. There are a couple of problems with that approach in terms of you can identify all the great projects in your watershed and rank them and do all that work, but when comes time to actually acquiring the property rights and developing the project, your success rate is going to be disappointing in most cases. We have a couple where we actually adopted local watershed plans that met our standards, but were implemented by watershed conservation groups that were on the ground and lived in those areas. Those have been successful in terms of the percentage of high priority projects that got implemented. But most of the time, our watershed planning was driven by projected mitigation needs. So we try to be out in front of when those needs were going to be permitted and realized, and we try to get out and do watershed planning in advance. And we would do all this great analysis, like a bunch of data, and we would not be able to secure the site. Or in many cases, the watershed plan identified projects that were too small to be practical or cost effective. Especially in urban areas, you can have a great site in a highly degraded system, but if you've got to deal with 142 landowners to get those conservation easements and to maintain and manage those conservation easements in perpetuity, not a good approach. So, I mean, I'm not saying don't ever try to do an urban project, but you have to be careful with how you apply this. We are right now finishing a new tool, watershed planning, that will take to the core, revisions to our compensation planning framework. The new approach is based on a lot of GIS models, but we basically assume we have the data to support that in North Carolina, the vast majority of our streams and watersheds are private. And we have the highest drainage density of any state in the U.S. And wetlands are drained in the eastern half of the state. Historically, with wetlands that were ditched and drained in a developed period. So we have no shortage of project opportunities. And to make the process even more efficient, and also to develop planning tools that we can push mitigation bankers to use. Mitigation bankers have to have a planning contact or a watershed contact, which is generally not specially sensitive. So we've been developing these tools. The idea is that most of the state has restoration opportunities, many of which lend themselves to application. So cooperating with Duke and the University of North Carolina, we developed these fancy GIS tools. So pretty much anywhere in the state, if you zoom in, and we're doing all this as well, you can look at a piece of property rather than looking at the watershed. And that piece of property, within the context of the watershed, will identify the types of restoration practices that will have support. So if you're out in Pender County where 3/4 of the surface area is drained wetlands currently supporting small farms along these lagoons, we've got some water quality issues that you're mitigating. If you're out in the mountains, in an area that has forested historic southern Appalachian perch trout habitat, and there are opportunities to store some of those water fish functions, then our planning tool will give you types of things that generally are problems and opportunities wherever you want to stay. And then you can look at your site, look at it in that context, field verify, mapping, build a project. It's less emphasis on spatial identifying interests for narrowly focused projects and looking at functional issues within that.
Thanks, Michael. I'll talk about some of those project development challenges in the morning as well. Lori?
I was going to say, New Hampshire has that issue with landowner rights is very strong. The treat or die state. So, and we're blessed though with strong land trust communities. So that's how we been able to sort of get beyond that landowner, identifying specific properties or locations. These projects come voluntarily to us from the land trust community. And they found sort of that understanding of criteria for selection that we're really, the 40 projects we got this year in for proposal. Maybe 5 were not great, the rest are really good properties for restoration as well as
Other thoughts? Last time tomorrow at the end of the day, we want to revisit the watershed approach. I think the caterers still on their way, but you want to start our lunch now if you want to use the restroom, have the last cup of coffee, and hopefully they'll be here shortly. And we'll be back in an hour around 12:30.